The moment I stepped through the heavy double doors of the school, I felt it. A sinister chill that seemed to permeate the very walls around me. I shrugged it off at first. It was an old building after all, probably just drafty on a cold autumn morning like this. But as I made my way to my locker, the feeling intensified. The long, empty hallways were so quiet, so still. The only sounds were the squeak of my shoes on the tile floor and the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. At my locker, I spun the combination dial and went to open it when I noticed something taped to the inside of the door. A newspaper clipping. I peeled it off and stared at the headline. Local high school student found dead. I scanned the article. A boy had apparently committed suicide in the second-floor bathroom just 2 weeks before. Unnerved, I crumpled up the clipping and tossed it in the trash. Weird prank, I thought. The morning classes crawled by as I tried to focus on the lessons and not on the growing unease within me. When the bell rang for lunch, I jumped at the shrill tone echoing through the halls. I told myself to get it together as I headed to the cafeteria. But the halls were empty again, and quieter than ever. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, like I was being followed. I walked faster, relieved when I reached the crowded, noisy cafeteria. Safety in numbers, I thought. I soon spotted my friends and hurried over to sit. Maybe they could provide some normalcy to this increasingly strange day. But as I approached, the smile fell from my face. Their faces were pale, eyes downcast as they picked at their lunches. "What's up with you guys?" I asked. They just shook their heads, mumbling about a bad morning. I swallowed hard, deciding I wasn't hungry anymore either. On the way to my afternoon classes, I passed by the second-floor boys' bathroom. I froze, staring at the door and picturing that newspaper headline. I could almost hear the echoes of ghostly cries coming from within. The hair on my arm stood up as I hastened away down the hall. The afternoon dragged on, a gnawing dread growing inside me. But finally, the last bell rang and I hurried for the exit, desperate for fresh air. At my locker, I grabbed my backpack, then headed for the doors. I felt an instant sense of relief as soon as I was outside, the autumn sun warm on my face. But as I walked towards the student lot, I realized I didn't see my car anywhere. Impossible. I knew exactly where I had parked. Frustrated, I went back inside to grab the spare set of keys from my locker. The school was empty and silent again, sending a chill down my spine. At my locker, I froze. Scratched into the paint were the words, "Get out." Hands shaking. I grabbed the keys and slammed my locker shut. I turned to leave when a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the halls. "Help me! Oh God, please help!" A girl's voice cried. I took off running toward the screams. They led me to the second-floor bathroom, the one from the article. I burst through the door to find it empty, the stalls standing open and vacant, except for one closed stall with blood pooling under it, dripping over the tiled floor. My heart seized as I realized the screams had gone silent. I turned and ran, nearly hyperventilating by the time I made it back to the first floor. As I raced for the doors, I heard noises behind me, slow shuffling footsteps, and a strange dragging sound. Terror seized me. I didn't look back. I ran for my life, my pounding footsteps reverberating through the empty halls. Finally, I burst through the front doors, not stopping until I was at the far end of the parking lot. I bent over gasping, glancing back at the looming school. It looked peaceful on the outside, betraying nothing of the horrors within. I scanned the lot desperately until my eyes landed on my car, exactly where I had parked that morning. I jumped inside and tore out of there, checking my mirrors until the school was out of sight. I still don't know what really happened that day. Maybe it was all in my head, an overactive imagination fueled by a creepy history. One thing is certain though, I never set foot in that school again. Just the thought of it still sends a bone, chilling fear through me years later. Some places are better left in the past. The first day at a new school is always nerve-wracking, but my first day at Ridgeview High was terrifying in ways I never could have imagined. It was only my third week living in town, and I still didn't know anyone. As I walked through the front doors that morning, I hoped I could just blend in and avoid attention. But that didn't happen. Instead, I became the target of a danger I never saw coming until it was too late. The day started normally enough. I suffered through a few awkward introductions in homeroom before making my way to my first class, English. The teacher, Mrs. Crawford, was explaining proper essay structure when the door swung open and a girl I didn't recognize strode in. She had long dark hair, pale skin, and wore all black. Without apologizing for her late entrance, she sat down in the empty desk next to mine. As the lesson resumed, I felt her eyes boring into the side of my head. I tried to ignore it, but she kept staring at me with cold intensity. It was unsettling, like she knew something I didn't. When the bell rang, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. As I hurried to my next class, I noticed the strange girl following close behind. She was in my math class too, and again sat next to me without a word, just giving me that icy stare. Before lunch, I used the bathroom, and she was there too, leaning against the sink, arms folded over her chest. I kept my eyes down, washed my hands quickly, and rushed from the room. Who was this girl, and why was she shadowing me everywhere I went? Could she tell I was the new kid and saw me as easy prey to torment? I spent the rest of the day trying to avoid her piercing gaze with little success. She was in nearly all my classes, appearing out of nowhere to take the seat beside me. When the final bell rang, I bolted for the bus line, praying she wouldn't follow. After that first strange day, I hoped I could fade into the background and avoid any further confrontations. But the rest of the week went much the same, with her turning up everywhere I went. She became my own personal stalker. Soon, other kids at school started noticing her odd behavior too. They whispered that her name was Riley and that she had a reputation for threatening people who crossed her. I believed it. The girl radiated danger, like a predator toying with its prey. By the end of the week, I was a nervous wreck. I decided enough was enough and it was time to confront Riley directly. Maybe if I stood up to her, she'd leave me alone. Or maybe she'd finally snap and her threats would become reality. But I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. On Monday, I steeled my nerves and approached Riley at her locker before homeroom. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Leave me alone." Riley turned those empty eyes on me and smiled. But it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a skeleton would make if it could. She didn't respond, just stared through me with that chilling grin until I finally had to walk away, unnerved. I could feel her watching me as I retreated down the hall. From then on, things escalated. My locker was broken into and my books were ripped apart. A threatening note was taped to my front door at home. The words "I'm watching you" were spray painted on my car. I attempted to tell the principal and other teachers, but they seemed strangely indifferent. Just stay away from her was the only advice they offered. But Riley was always near. She had staked her claim on me for some twisted reason only she understood. The menacing acts continued to intensify over the next few weeks. I'd find my clothes shredded, tires slashed, windows in my house smashed. Through it all, Riley maintained her eerie silence. She wanted me to know she was behind it, but would never admit it outright. I was having trouble eating, sleeping, concentrating in school. I felt like I was coming unhinged. Surely someone would notice and intervene soon, right? But the staff continued to ignore the problem, acting like this was all perfectly normal. It was clear I was on my own. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I began noticing strange wounds on my body that I couldn't account for. First, some superficial cuts and bruises. Then a deep gash on my forearm requiring stitches. It terrified me to think Riley had started hurting me physically while I slept. The worst came a month later when I woke up disoriented in my own bed, covered in scratches and burns. My head throbbed as if I'd been struck. I realized with dread that Riley must have broken in during the night. She was fully unhinged and out to destroy me. I told my parents we had to move again right away. But strangely, they acted oblivious too. "Everything is fine. You just had a bad dream," they said. I pleaded with them to believe me, but they insisted it was all in my head. How could this be happening? I knew then I had to take drastic action. I began spending nights in my closet, blocking the door with heavy boxes. I brought weapons to school, though they did little to deter Riley's staring and veiled threats. No one seemed to think anything was wrong except me. One evening, Riley caught me in the empty school parking lot after hours. She pinned me against the hood of a car, her wild eyes burning into me as her hands wrapped around my throat. As my vision went dark, I finally understood the horrible truth. Riley wasn't really there. She had never been real. I was losing my mind, and I was the only one who could make it stop. Nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced at Crescent Heights High. Looking back now, the red flags were everywhere from the start. I just wish I had paid more attention. Walking through those heavy double doors that first morning, the air felt unnaturally still and stale, like the whole building had been shut up all summer. The beige lockers lining the deserted halls were all padlocked tight. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me. Where was everyone? As I wandered around looking for the main office, the silence was almost oppressive. My tentative footsteps echoed off the scuffed tile floors. Finally, I came across a door marked office and stepped inside. A woman with over-teased hair looked up sharply from her computer, her long neon pink nails clicking on the keyboard. "Can I help you?" she asked in a bored tone. I told her I was new, and she sighed dramatically as she rustled through stacks of papers to find my schedule. She gestured for me to follow her, leading me back to the main hallway. I asked when homeroom started, confused by the continuing absence of students. She shrugged and said, "Kids come and go. You can't rely on them for much." Her tall heels clomped loudly as she walked away. The first half of the day crept by. Classrooms that should have held 30 students or more had just a handful present. By lunchtime, I still hadn't made any friends. Everyone kept their eyes down and didn't talk. A few kids sat alone at tables, nibbling listlessly on chips or apples. By last period, I was more than ready to go home. But I had one more class. Biology in room 305. The door was halfway open when I got there. Expecting another near-empty room, I was surprised to see lab stations filled. Lively conversations in the air. This was more like it. Just as I was feeling relieved, a blood-curdling shriek rang out from the back. Whipping my head around, I tried to see what had happened, but the other students didn't react at all. One girl laughed loudly right next to me. Had I just imagined it? Before I could ask, the teacher swooped in and started lecturing. I shook off the unease and forced myself to focus. Later, at my locker, a kid with shaggy black hair approached me. "Sorry, you had to hear that earlier. It happens sometimes when the experiments get out of hand." His grin seemed more ominous than reassuring. I shut my locker and left, his hollow eyes following me down the hall. By Thursday, fewer and fewer kids showed up to class. The claustrophobic air pressed down in the windowless classrooms. I jumped at every stray sound. The squeak of a chair, groan of old pipes in the walls. Something was very wrong here. I tried asking a girl in study hall where everyone had gone. "Doesn't matter," she muttered without looking up. "We're all going sooner or later." Her forearm was bandaged with red, tin jaws. My stomach turned. The last day of the week, I got to school early, determined to figure out what was going on. The creak of distant footsteps made me freeze. Who else was here? I followed the shuffling sound down the hall, tracing it to the biology lab. The door was closed, but muffled voices leaked through the crack. These are the only two left. We're so close now. The 5-year plan is right on schedule. I strained to hear the teacher's garbled reply. "Excellent. Dispose of them. The master will be pleased." My blood ran cold. I backed away slowly, then sprinted for the exit. As I burst out the front doors into the hazy morning sun, I swore I could feel icy fingers reaching for me from the darkness I'd escaped. I never went back there. Tried telling administrators, even the police, what I'd heard and seen, but they chalked it up to teen imagination. Maybe they were right. All I know is the nightmares about being trapped in those empty halls never ceased. I saw on the news a year later that the school had been shut down abruptly mid-semester when enrollment dropped to 0. Part of me will always wonder what evil lurked within those walls. What terrible experiments went on in room 305. But the rest of me hopes to never find out.